Hi, welcome everybody to a Friday the 13th, 2025 episode of On Iowa Politics. This week on the podcast, the field of U.S. Senate candidates in Iowa continues to grow, and the backlash and fallout from Governor Kim Reynolds' veto of pipeline and property rights legislation. Hello, everyone. I'm Erin Murphy, the Des Moines Bureau Chief for the Gazette in Cedar Rapids. With me this week, our Gazette Deputy Bureau Chief, Tom Barton. Hello, Tom.
Hello, Erin.
Lee Des Moines Bureau Chief Maya Marchel Hoff is with us. Hello, Maya.
Good afternoon, Erin.
We have Jared McNett of the Sioux City Journal back after a multiple week break. Good to have you back, Jared.
Erin, rest in peace to two of the genuine musical geniuses of our time, Sly Stone and Brian Wilson.
Amen to that. Is that all this week? Yeah. It's coming threes. If you're a music star, put yourself in bubble wrap here. Gazette columnist Todd Dorman is with us. Hello, Todd.
Hello.
And making her On Iowa Politics podcast debut, we also have with us today Gazette columnist Althea Cole. Welcome, Althea.
Thank you. Hi there.
All right, let's get started this week with the most recent news, that of Governor Kim Reynolds' veto of legislation that sought to limit hazardous liquid pipelines and the use of eminent domain for private projects. It was not necessarily a huge surprise that Reynolds vetoed the bill, to borrow a gambling phrase. I think that's where the safe money was. But what was surprising, at least to me, I thought, was the level of backlash from Iowa House Republicans in particular, including their call for a special session of the Iowa legislature to override the governor's veto. Not something you hear about regularly. Maya, let me start with you, if you don't mind. I mentioned that backlash and the level it rose to. Give us a few snippets of some of that, and also, if you can, tell us why it's probably unlikely that we'll see that special session.
Yeah, as you mentioned, it's not surprising that Governor Reynolds ended up vetoing this bill. Some of the backlash is surprising, but also this has been just a very heated debate all session. Even in the last 4 years, this has been an issue that a lot of folks have been following very closely. But yeah, there was a lot of backlash on the House side. Speaker Pat Grassley said, he sent out he said he would field a petition among members of the House to call a special session to override the veto. He called it a major setback for Iowa and for landowners who have been fighting across Iowa. And so, he made that very clear. And then Representative Bobby Kaufman, he had some, statements for Reynolds as well. He, on Radio Iowa, I believe he referred to Reynolds as
Bruce Rastetter's errand girl.
Yes.
No.
And
that's a reference to folks who don't follow this story closely, to the owner of Summit Carbon Solutions, Bruce Rastetter. Sorry, go ahead, Maya.
And then, of course, Representative Republican Steve Holt of Denison, who has also been a very vocal proponent of legislation that, he says protects landowners' rights against eminent domain and carbon capture pipelines. He was also pretty frustrated with the veto. That's not surprising, just because he has been pretty vocal about that during this session and past sessions as well. Yeah, that was just some of the response to that.
I emailed all of our legislators, including Steve Holt, and he sent me about 9 paragraphs worth of a response.
Sure.
Which was definitely the longest response I got from many of our area legislators, that's for sure.
Yeah, and here's his response. He said the governor's lack of leadership on this issue for the last 3 years, during which time she could not have offered her own suggestions, but did not. And now her veto has placed our once disciplined and principled Republican Party into conflict and confusion, leaving voters to doubt our commitment to uphold the Constitution we took an oath to defend. So that's one of the things that he said. But on the point of calling a special session, like you mentioned, Erin, that is probably not likely, because while there was backlash on the House side, there was on the Senate side, especially from Senate leaders, including Senator Jack Whitver. They supported Reynolds' veto and supported her choice on that. And, of course, you need, according to Article 3 of the Iowa Constitution, you need both chambers. You need either the governor to call a special session, or you need 2/3 of members in both chambers to call it back. And they could have the votes in the House, but the 34 votes needed in the Senate aren't there based on the vote that was taken on this bill back in May, where 13 Republican senators joined Democrats to pass it. So.
Yeah, and that got them to 27, which is short of the 34 you need. So in other words, some of those Senate Republicans who were opposed to the bill and most likely supported Reynolds' veto would have to flip and agree to a special session. That seems pretty unlikely. And you've been hearing from House Republicans both last night and even today as we record here on Thursday afternoon, saying that while are going to make that effort, they acknowledge it's highly unlikely that's going to be successful to call a special session. So what we're looking at instead is what happens in the coming months, and then obviously even more so next January when the legislature reconvenes in 2026. Althea, let's bring you right in here. It's just fascinating to watch from the cheap seats here how this topic continues to divide state house Republicans, and this week certainly appeared to only widen that divide. I'm curious to hear, Althea, what you think just kind of about the way this debate has unfolded, not even just this year, but over years, and then whether the heated commentary we've heard, and Maya provided some of what's just a few of many examples. Althea, tell me what you think. Does that have any impacts within the party? Does that make it harder for them when they come back to work next year? Or is this just kind of the thing that this happens sometimes and they forget it and move on to the next thing?
Well, I say a lot of the time, the most interesting political events often are intra-party,
Absolutely.
not Republicans versus Democrats, but the party within itself. And this is a perfect example of that. As far as the session to call the veto, or the session to override the veto, yeah, they know they're not going to get that. But at the same time, it would be very helpful politically for Republicans within their own caucus to maybe get on the record who supports a special session and who doesn't, so that when they have those inter-party squabbles, and when they have this big falling out that they're having right now, and when certain supporters are saying, screw you, heck with you, why am I doing this? Ultimately, they can point to the Democrats who also don't care enough to override the veto and be like, do you really have any better alternative?
It's going to be so interesting, like I said, especially to see who does, to your point, Althea, who signs on to that, and then what that looks like. Shameless plug. There was a press conference, again, we're taping Thursday afternoon, earlier Thursday, with landowners, and Representative Steve Holt was on that as well, and we asked him a little bit about that too, and he had some interesting things to say about what next year's session will look like. So make sure you check out that story as well as all of our other coverage on this.
Speaking of like looking ahead to next year, like I said, I heard back from quite a few Northwest Iowa legislators. One of the main ones, though, who was looking ahead to next year with the response that he gave me was State Senator Kevin Alonz of Salix. Among other things, he told me, he said that when the legislature returns, quote, we will use every tool at our disposal to take big politics and big business out of eminent domain. So that's some pretty big talk.
Yeah, and I mean, and I'm obviously paraphrasing here, but part of Steve Holt's answer to that question was basically, we're going to keep doing what we've been doing, and it's up to Senate Republicans to come meet us. There wasn't much of a we'll work with them and see what kind of agreement we can come to. It was it's up to them to figure out that what we've been doing is right, kind of thing. So that's why I say it's going to be fascinating. I mean, Althea, you mentioned it. We see this from time to time, intra-party squabbles. Is this kind of a run-of-the-mill kind of thing, or is this another level? I mean, are Steve Holt and Mike Buslow going to be able to sit in the same room next year and work on eminent domain legislation?
I mean, I would check both of them for clubs or worse in their pockets before they walk into the Capitol. But
Maybe send some state patrol in with them wherever they go.
the debate itself, a lot of people frame it as the grassroots of the party versus the establishment of the party, because of course you've got a lot of big party donors who were in favor of the pipeline and not in favor of making eminent domain impossible for the pipeline. So, okay, the grassroots, on the other hand, is made up not just of Republicans, it's made up of a lot of Democrats too.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not like those Democrats are going to come over to the party at any time as registered members, let alone vote for anybody on the Republican Party ticket. One big establishment versus grassroots fight that I can remember in recent history from the Republican Party would be in 2012, at the 2012 Iowa presidential caucuses, when a lot of grassroots did a lot of organizing for candidate Ron Paul. And that organizing basically meant that we're not only going to go to caucus, we're going to go to our conventions, and we are going to get our Ron Paul supporting allies elected to important party posts as far as county party chairs and members of the state Central Committee. And that seemed really good on paper. You could say that they were very successful. Anybody who remembers what happened at the 2012 Republican National Convention remembers that Iowa cast all but, I think, like 2 of its votes for the candidate Ron Paul. And it was just kind of this, like, silence and glass shattering in the background, like, what? Well, that's because the Ron Paul allies and the Ron Paul, campaign had the support that enabled them to get delegates elected to the convention. Now, what happened with party leadership after that? Well, the Ron Paul, they were called Paul Bots, Palestinians, Bolsheviks. We had all sorts of nicknames for them. Yes, we. I wasn't part of the party yet, but, I learned a lot of the history very quickly. And what they did was they ran the party into the ground, where it came to a point where they couldn't even make payroll as of, I think, early 2014. That's when the establishment struck back, to use a Star Wars term. And, they got establishment people reelected to the state Central Committee. And what looked like a, imminent defeat in 2014 ended up being the year that they got Jeff Kaufman installed as the head of the party, Joni Ernst elected to the Senate in a race that nobody expected her to win. Rod Blum won in District 1. David, what's his name, who's now in the state legislature, won in
David
District
Young.
3.
Yep.
It was a really good year for Republicans once the establishment struck back. So the establishment has its role and it has its purpose and has its importance, whether or not the grassroots wants to admit it. But of course, in politics, common sense often prevails at either the ballot box or the caucus or, wherever they're handing out the ballots. But it's the conversation where the loudest voices often carry the day.
Yeah.
Well, and part of the problem that Holt and, Bobby Kaufman, who has vowed that he will never work on another piece of legislation again proposed by the governor. I thought that he sort of lost his mind for a little bit yesterday. The pieces are all the same. The Senate's still going to be the same next year. Right. The House is the same. The governor is still going to be the governor. So, and the other thing is, by January, where will the Summit Pipeline project be? I mean, they've run into all sorts of trouble in South Dakota, and as of now, it's an open question as to whether that pipeline will ever be built. So, if it's still an issue next legislative session, I mean, that could be interesting, but if it's not, then you got to wonder, does it even carry over to the next election if there's no longer a Summit Pipeline to sort of use as the scapegoat for the oligarchy or whatever their whatever you want to label you want to attach to it.
But that's why they're having this fight right now. Better this year than next year in the lead up to 2026.
And I would say, even to the point of, like, the pieces that are on the board, even if you changed some of those out, like, it might still not benefit the anti-pipeline people, because when I was in, was it 2 weeks ago now? I haven't been on here in a while, so I don't remember. But whenever I was covering Randy Feenstra's family picnic a couple weeks ago, and he's the main person on the Republican side that's declared right now, I asked him, if you were in the governor's office and this legislation was on your desk, would you would you veto it or, would you sign it? And he did not want any part of answering that question whatsoever and moved right on to the next question. So even with the new governor, this might not change very much.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, for all the reasons delineated, it's been fascinating and it's gonna continue to be. We'll obviously have more to talk about that on future episodes. By the way, that was one of what 20-ish bills that Reynolds took final action on, and we don't have even remotely enough time to talk about all those. So make sure you go check out all our coverage on that, both from Wednesday and ongoing over the next few days as we sort of put the final pins in the 2025 legislative session. We're going to move on now to Iowa's U.S. Senate campaign, where the Democratic primary grew by one more. State Senator Zach Walz of Coralville made his candidacy official on Wednesday. Wednesday, right? Or was it Tuesday? Wednesday, right? Or was it anyways, someday this week. Times of social construct. And the next day, his campaign announced raising over $400,000 over that first day post-launch. Walz joins fellow Democrats J.D. Scholten, a state legislator from Sioux City. Cuba, did I just say Cuba City? That's my Wisconsin roots showing up, y'all. Holy cow. Little Cuba City in southwest Wisconsin. Beat our butts in basketball all the time. Can't believe I referenced him. Walz joins fellow Democrats J.D. Scholten, a state legislator from Sioux City, and Nathan Sage, a Chamber of Commerce leader from Indianola. They all seek the party's nomination to challenge incumbent Republican U.S. Senator Joni Ernst, assuming she runs for re-election in 2026. She hasn't made that official yet. I think mostly we expect she will, but we'll see. Todd, just give me your top line. He's in the race now officially. Thoughts on Walz' run for the Senate and where he fits in this primary as it's constructed so far, anyways.
Well, when legislators run for statewide office, sometimes they feel like, they've accomplished a lot. He used to be the minority leader, but in reality, a lot of people won't know who Zach Walz is necessarily. The first thing they'll think is that he's young, and he is. He's going to be, I don't know what his age is going to be if he gets elected. He's 33 now. He may have to they say every senator thinks they can be president. He'll have to wait a year or two before he can start having those thoughts. So he did sort of gain some national acclaim when he spoke in 2011 against discriminating against LGBTQ folks, because his mom and her partner were his two moms he talked about, and that got a lot of attention. I also don't blame him for wanting to get out of the legislature, the Senate. It's for Democrats, that's not very fulfilling these days. So now how does he do? I don't know. You've seen, when Nathan Sage got in, you had people like Jonathan Capehart for the Washington Post start writing about he sounded like a MAGA candidate. And so, maybe he's onto something. And then when J.D. Scholten got in, you saw, I think it was Cooks or one of the political reports, switched to leans Republican from solid Republican. So obviously there are people nationally that remember when Scholten ran against Steve King and nearly beat him. And then, there's talk, I'm trying to think of the other ones. Oh, Jackie Norris and
Josh Turek.
And I've heard a lot of good stuff about Turek. He could be a formidable candidate, sort of a newcomer that people might gravitate to. So, the fact remains that it's going to be a tough seat to win. Ernst has had some sort of potholes, lately, and we're all going to die. So, these things happen. But Walz, it's also difficult to elect for a statewide candidate to come from Johnson County, because people have all sorts of ideas about Johnson County and People's Republic and all that stuff. So, I mean, let's see, he's a decent candidate, but at this point I would be surprised if he ends up with a nomination. But I guess that's why you have the campaign.
Yeah, that's right.
It really does seem like it's going to be hard for him to differentiate himself from the other people that are in the primary already, who have much more like defined sort of, well, we can ring the bell for lane talk. But, they do. Scholten and Sage both have much more defined sort of personas or lanes or whatever the hell, word you want to use. Schulten in part going in on the experience of having run before and having learned from that and having overperformed in a part of the state that's not exactly warm toward Democrats. And then Nathan Sage has almost been doing a Dan Osborne kind of, populist, no nonsense sort of thing. So when you've already got those kind of positions claimed, it becomes much harder to carve out your own niche in a primary.
Well, and $400,000 is a lot of money to me, but in the U.S. Senate election, in a primary and a campaign, that's like, that's 2 weeks of operational expenses if you're running TV and stuff. So it's he's going to have to raise more money, and the more crowded the field gets, obviously, the tougher that's going to be.
Yeah. And by the way, Jared, you know me, I love the lane talk. That means we're just one step away from asking whether someone's endorsement matters. We're in it now, baby.
They don't matter. Right now, I'll say it. They don't matter.
Yeah, you can just get recordings of Todd and I saying that and just play them in any time.
Maybe Trump's endorsement might matter.
I was going to say there is
one
one that's going to come up in one of these elections that I think will defy our typical answer to that question. Jared, since you're back with us, Schulten's announcement, as we noted, was a couple weeks ago, but wanted to pick your brain on that quick. As Todd alluded to, he's run some big time campaigns before, including that one where he nearly picked off Steve King in 2018, I believe that was. What are your thoughts? You know him as well, if not better than any of us, Jared, from your neck of the woods. What are your thoughts of JD as a statewide candidate?
It was last Monday that he declared on my day off. I should note we've now had 3 candidates from our area declare for higher office when I've been off.
Wow. I feel like you
feature-
need to give us a heads up next time you're off, just so we can plan on a new announcement.
2 of them I was off just because I don't work Mondays, and then the other one I was on vacation. So that's been good, real good timing by all of them. But yeah, I talked to Schulten, fittingly enough, at the ballpark for the Sioux City Explorers, whom he pitches for, and he made clear in that interview and in others that he's done that what spurred him to jump in when he did was the comments that Ernst made in Parkersburg about reductions to Medicaid and SNAP spending. And he said, the people of Iowa deserve better. I don't think there's anything worse that you could do than cut Medicaid, cut SNAP, just so you can give billionaires bigger tax breaks. That's not Iowa in my mind. And as you were kind of mentioning with the Steve King thing, already both he and his campaign, understandably, have made a big deal out of the fact that in every competitive race that he's been in, 2018, 2020, and 2024, he's overperformed the top of the ticket. Of course, 2 of those races he did lose. One of those was by a sizable margin to Randy Feenstra, but the Steve King one was 3.3 points in an incredibly unfavorable district. And then this past fall, which we talked about before, he won by 6.9 points in a district that Trump carried. Yeah, that history seems like it was enough that Todd was mentioning this, that the Sabado Crystal Ball people, they shifted their rating for the U.S. Senate election in Iowa from safe Republican to likely Republican, which, isn't necessarily something to pop champagne bottles about if you're a Democrat. But it means at least that there's a narrow sort of window, and it would, kind of involve, I guess, overperforming in certain places like Northwest Iowa, and then hoping for long coattails from the gubernatorial candidate. I should say, too, early on, it seems like Schulten is the Democratic candidate who might most likely appeal to whatever thin sliver of never Trump Republicans there are in the state. Some of the kinds of folks Nikki Haley courted. The Bulwark podcast the other week, which is like the bastion of never Trump Republicans, was talking very favorably about Schulten. So that's another group, however small, that might be more open to him than others in the race.
He's from a little south of you, if I remember right, Jared, from Council Bluffs, right? Josh Turk. But I'm curious where you think he can kind of make a similar argument about his geographical placement and that he won his election there. Now, not in as big an area as JD, because Josh Turek has only won to the state house. He hasn't been in a congressional election. But I'm curious if you have any thoughts at all about is that two candidates who might have a similar appeal and message if Josh Turek gets into this primary?
Well, I don't know him super well, but I do remember I don't think it was 24, but I think it was 22 that he won like the closest state house race of anybody in the House of Representatives.
That's right.
So like, you have that kind of experience winning very, very close races, which if you're going to win as a Democrat, which is already a big if, it's not like they're going to blow out Republicans in the U.S. Senate race in Iowa. It would be a close race. So even though it's on a smaller scale, having the experience of having competed in a razor thin race probably doesn't hurt if you're a candidate like Josh Turek.
Yeah. Althea, let me ask you, because we're going to go on to Joni Ernst now, but before we do that, a couple of folks have mentioned that the Democrats are trying to make hay out of the comments that have now gone viral. To your estimation, Althea, is that the kind of thing that hurts Joni Ernst ultimately, politically speaking, next year, assuming she runs for re-election, or is that one of those things that we're literally 17 months out from an election? It won't be on anybody's mind by that point.
It's not that they're trying to make hay. They have succeeded in that beautifully. And I mean, look, in all fairness, and I say this as a Republican, she gave them that one on a silver platter. So well done her in that regard. Yeah, good thing something like that happened 17 months out. The follow-up, the whole tooth fairy thing, that was definitely an unforced error. I don't
the quote unquote apology video you're referring to?
Yeah.
Yeah.
As far as that, what I've noticed, you could of course call that a very Trumpian-like comment. In what I would say, as far as whether or not that's a good idea, is that I've noticed that every candidate who ran after Trump, who bills themselves as, that district's version of Donald Trump, loses. The most obvious character in mind would be Carrie Lake, who ran for governor of Arizona, and then she ran for senator of Arizona. And okay, she's got something to do now, the head of Voice of America, which, Doge is trying to get rid of. So good for her. And actually, Carrie Lake, that's an interesting example, because when people were talking about, primarying Joni Ernst if she doesn't vote to confirm Pete Hegseth, that's the name that they were floating around as somebody to challenge her in a primary. Hey, get Carrie Lake to move back to Iowa. And I was just like, no. I would have no shortage of things to say about that. But good thing it's, for Ernst's sake, for Senator Ernst's sake, good for her that it's 17 months out. She's got time to kind of let that marinate for a little bit. Now, voters do as well. She does have a primary challenger already, and she already had one kind of in the bullpen, Jim Carlin, who nothing says I have a lot of support in my own community like going across the states, a couple 100 miles to do your campaign kickoff event, which unfortunately, although it is here in Cedar Rapids, I will not be able to attend at Calvary Community Church in Cedar Rapids. So, I'm sure her primary challenger is pretty elated about that. That would be former state senator Jim Carlin. But of course, the question would be, if you look at the actual, context of when Ernst made her mark, it was in regards, it was in response to, somebody shouting, "We're all gonna, people are dying." And as far as the temperature at the town halls and everything like that, are Republicans appreciative of that, or are they particularly irritated by that? I would say it's definitely more the latter than the former. So if Carlin is really thrilled about the whole "we're going to die" thing, then he's also going to need to explain to Republicans, would I, even if he wouldn't have said the same, what are his sentiments on the issue himself? And I don't think he's going to be terribly impressive there. He didn't do terribly well challenging Chuck Grassley. I don't expect that he will have any different support this year, other than the people who backed him when he ran against Grassley in early 22. So, yeah. But as I said, just a few moments ago, good for Ernst that this happened 17 months before the election and not 17 minutes.
Yeah. Yep. Tom, speaking of, that's a perfect segue. I wanted to ask you about former state senator Carlin. jumped into this before, as we said, before waiting to hear whether Senator Ernst is going to officially run for re-election. We assume she will. I'm sure he assumes the same. You interviewed Senator Collin for that announcement. Did he tell you why he wants to take on Joni Ernst?
He did, and a lot of the reasons are similar to the reasons why he decided to take on Chuck Grassley in 2022. He said he felt like, again, a lot of the same reasons why he challenged Grassley are valid today. He talked about the budget deficit and the national debt being a huge issue, and said that the fact that the national debt grew from, I think, somewhere around 17 trillion to 36 trillion during Senator Ernst's years of service, while she promised to, fight for a balanced budget. He said there's the rhetoric and then there's the votes, and that when you take a close look at the votes, that Senator Ernst, in his view, is not following through on what she said that she was going to do. And then I asked about, well, what about her involvement with the Senate Doge Caucus and her efforts with the administration's actions and efforts to try and root out waste, fraud, and abuse and reduce federal spending. And he kind of brushed it off and said, well, she can claim the Doge badge, but he said he doesn't put a lot of stock in that, pointing to, again, her record, her votes of supporting what he viewed as kind of out of control spending that's got us to this point where we now have again, a national debt that's, approaching or somewhere around $36 trillion. According to his campaign website, he's kind of pitching himself as the candidate that is going to represent everyday Iowans and not what he said is the DC swamp, and feels that Iowans deserve a senator who will tell the truth, work to improve their lives, and put their interests first. And said that, again, he feels that Iowa needs a true conservative voice in the U.S. Senate, and, called himself a proud and unapologetic supporter of President Trump. Again, he made reference to, Joni Ernst promising to make him squeal, and argues that instead Ernst has made deals. So that's a reference to the viral campaign ad that Ernst aired when she first ran for the seat, highlighting her upbringing, castrating hogs on an Iowa farm, arguing that prepared her well to cut pork or to cut wasteful government spending. In a news release announcing his campaign, Jim Carlin, talked about, as Althea mentioned, Ernst angering America First conservatives with kind of her initial reluctance to support Pete Hegseth as Secretary of Defense over allegations of impropriety, financial mismanagement, and public drunkenness and other personal misconduct, which Hegseth has denied. Ernst ultimately voted to confirm him to the position. He also criticized Senator Ernst over her support for providing military aid to Ukraine in its fight against Russia, and her 2022 vote in favor of the Respect for Marriage Act is kind of examples of Ernst not voting in line with conservative values.
Althea brought up an interesting point. Jared, what did you do to Jim Carlin that he's leaving Western Iowa for his campaign announcement, going all the way over to Cedar Rapids?
His office is like an exit away from our office, so he could have popped over here. I wasn't around when he made the announcement. Like I said, I was out of town, but he could have popped right over here.
Jared, I remember when in 2022 when he took on Senator Grassley in the primary, and he obviously didn't come anywhere close to upsetting him, but did get, I want to say, around 20% of the primary vote.
20, I double checked. 26.5, yeah.
Okay. So not nothing, obviously also not nowhere near enough to actually threaten him. But I remember that conversation being, okay, so that happened, maybe a little bit noteworthy, but does that matter when we look ahead to the general election? Obviously, it very much did not. Is there any reason to believe anything will be different this time around as he similarly takes on Senator Ernst?
Different, yes. Incredibly different, probably not. But he got 26.5% of the vote against Grassley, who is way more popular with Republican voters in the state than Ernst is. And, Tom talked about the early agita this year with Ernst over the Hegseth vote. I've also, and I know this one sounds kind of strange, but I've also seen some agita with Ernst from Trump supporters over the comments that she made in Parkersburg. I know that, again, sounds kind of strange, but I've seen more than a few people kind of upset with her over that and saying it was just sort of classless. That might be people who already, kind of more MAGA affiliated Trump supporters who already don't like her, just finding new reasons to not like her. But I still kind of found that interesting. So yeah, I think Carlin could definitely garner more of a percentage against Ernst than he did against Grassley, but I still don't think it's probably enough to win a primary against someone who's going to have way more resources.
All right. Awesome. Man, it was quite a week. Great talk. I appreciate everyone coming on, and thank you all to stuck with us here throughout. And Althea, thank you and congratulations on making it through your first podcast. We'll keep having you back. All right. That's going to do it for this episode of On Iowa Politics. If you're not already, please subscribe to us on your streaming service of choice or on YouTube, where you can also smash that like button. You can also find the podcast each and every week on your preferred Gazette or Lee newspaper website. Now that you've listened to the On Iowa Politics podcast, make sure you're also subscribed to the On Iowa Politics newsletter, where every morning in your inbox you'll receive all the latest politics and government coverage from our team. You can subscribe to that free newsletter at the Gazette's website, thegazette.com. And lastly, as we talked about throughout, a lot of great topics that's coming from a lot of great coverage from everybody you heard here today. And you can find all those stories on the pages and websites of the Quad City Times, Muscatine Journal, Cedar Rapids Gazette, Waterloo Cedar Falls Courier, Mesa City Globe Gazette, Council Bluffs Daily Nonpareil, and the Sioux City Journal. For Tom Barton, Maya Marchel, Hoff, Jared McNett, Althea Cole, Todd Dorman, and our producer Bailey Cheon, I'm Erin Murphy. Be well, everyone, and be good.